Phil here from Analytically Tanked, and today I'm going to show you how to paint this Word Bearer's Legion Tactical Space Marine for the Horus Heresy by Games Workshop. Let's get started. For the armor, I started by shading in over a white undercoat a mix of 50/50 Scale 75 violet ink and airbrush thinner. I chose to shade in purple here over a white undercoat as opposed to the more traditional purple base coat and white zenithal highlight because, one, I wanted to have a purple shadow because purple and red go very well together, as you'll see, and two, because I wanted to skip the additional step of doing a purple base coat. Because I had a white spray paint, I decided to spray the model white first and then shade it down. If I went with black instead, though, in the traditional zenithal highlight method, I would have had to spray it black, then do a purple base coat, then do a white zenithal highlight. So by going from a highlight down to the shadows, I was able to skip a step. For this step, I shot the purple ink mixture at a very low angle to only really fill in where the shadows would fall on this model. Unlike the normal zenithal highlight method that you're shooting the highlights of the model or the highest points where light would catch, in this case we're shooting the lowest points and leaving the highlights white to be the brightest points for the next step when we layer on red. For the red, I then came in with thinned down Scale 75 deep red and applied 2 thin layers over the entire model. Because this paint is a little bit thin and thus a little bit transparent, the purple from the previous step shows through and leaves some nice rich shadows, as well as provides some color contrast and visual interest. Next, I airbrush on highlights that are a mixture of about 50/50 golden skin and deep red from Scale 75. I like using flesh tones to highlight my red because it desaturates the color without making it look pink and or orange. Generally speaking, if you add pure white to your red, you'll get a pinkish chalky color, and adding orange will make it too vibrant. So instead, I use a peach or a skin color to lighten the color without losing the redness of it and not going into too pink or too orange. Next, I come in with thinned down crimson ink from Scale 75, again about 50% ink to thinner, and do 2 layers here. The first is a more targeted one to push the shadows deeper and pretty much goes wherever the purple ink went before. And the second is a general all-over spray, which will deepen the entire armor and give a nice crimson color, while still maintaining the color gradient I built up before. I also spray the model with a layer of gloss varnish at this step. This is very important here because the inks we used previously can be somewhat water soluble. They'll actually rub off when we apply decals later on, so I use gloss varnish here to lock those inks in and protect them from future steps. For the shoulder pads, I start by layering on a single black layer. For this I used flat black by Scale 75, but you can use whatever black you want. I then lightly highlight the shoulder pads with a thinned down layer of Anthracite Gray by Scale 75 through an airbrush. Anthracite Gray is a dark bluish gray, much like Thunderhawk Blue from Games Workshop, and I really like using it to highlight black here because I think it adds a little more visual interest than just using a pure dark gray to highlight the black. Next, I applied decals to the shoulder pads, as well as some additional decals around the lower leg and over the chest piece. After the decals are in place, I then apply a layer of microsol that thins down the decals and helps them fit into the model's cracks and crevices and curves a little better. In order to give this model a beat-up and battle-worn look, as well as to provide some definition to the edges of the armor plates, I sponge stripped this model first with Rhinox hide by Games Workshop, then with a mix of 50/50 sunny skin tone and deep red by Scale 75, and then finally a very light chip of Thrash metal to represent the metallic armor showing through scratches and chips. Because I am planning on giving this entire model a black oil wash, I figured I would save some time in a couple steps by doing this silver now and washing it as well with the black oil with the rest of the armor. So to do this, I just apply a single layer of Thrash metal by Scale 75 to all of the cabling and ribbing on the model. I also paint the rims of the shoulder pads silver at this step. Oil washes are quickly becoming one of my go-to techniques for quickly and easily shading models and providing visual interest without a ton of work. If you haven't used oil washes before, they're actually really easy to get started with, and all you need to do is pick up some odorless mineral spirits and oil paint from your local art store. To start with, I spray the entire model with gloss varnish again. This is to make the surface of the model more smooth, which will make rubbing the oils off later on a bit easier, and also to make sure the oils flow into the crevices and don't stain the surface of the armor. Next, I mix up a batch of oil wash, which is a mixture of odorless mineral spirits and lamp black oil paint by Windsor and Nuln. This wash should be fairly thin so that it flows into the cracks and crevices of the armor. But if it's too thin, you'll see a kind of grainy texture pattern with the oil paints when you apply it to the model. If that's the case, just add a little more oil paint to get a good consistency that flows nicely but isn't grainy or textured. This wash is then applied liberally over the entire model, making sure to get it into all the cracks and crevices and everywhere the armor panels meet. Because we'll be wiping off the oil in the next step, it's okay here if it's a little messy and you get some overspill in places you don't want it to be. Once the oil wash is dry, it has a more matte look as opposed to the glossy look it has when it's wet. I come in and wipe away the excess oil with a makeup remover. I prefer using these foam sponges as opposed to Q-tips because these will not leave any fibers or strings in the model. And I've had some really bad luck in the past with a Q-tip that I leave a bunch of cotton strands that just get stuck to the model and never come off. Also, if there's any spots you want to really remove all the oil paint from, you can dip the foam makeup remover into some white spirits and use that to wipe away all of the oil on the model, leaving the bright red showing through. Finally, I do yet another layer of varnish, this time matte varnish, over the entire model to dull the shine down and to lock the oils in. You can use a satin varnish here if you'd like a little bit more of a shiny finish, but I really like the look of matte models, so I choose to use AKA Interactive's Ultra Matte Varnish. Because the matte varnish I just sprayed on dulls down all the metallics, I come back in with the same silver I used before, in this case Thrash metal, and re-highlight all of the silver parts, including the shoulder pads, the straps across the chest, and the faceplate. I also start on the eyes here by giving them a base coat of Thrash metal as well. At first I tried a new technique for the eyes using the Citadel Technical Waystone Green paint. This is a pretty thick semi-translucent paint that is sold as a solution for all of your eyes and gemstones, where you just apply a single thick layer over your metallic base coat and it gives you a nice and easy high contrast gemstone or eye. I hated this actually though. It went on super globby, didn't really give a nice look, couldn't stand the actual appearance. So I then decided to go back over everything with the Citadel shade, Biel-Tan green, and give me the look I wanted. So if I was to do this again, skip the technical, don't buy the Citadel Technical paint, just buy the shade and go with that. The bolt gun's gun casing was first painted black and then highlighted with scale 75 Anthracite Gray. The metal parts were then painted with Thrash metal and shaded with a mix of 50/50 Nuln Oil and Druchi Violet by Games Workshop. I've been using a lot of this 50/50 Druchi Violet and Nuln Oil mix in my metallics recently, especially for bolt guns, as I think it just adds a little bit more visual interest and a little more color to the mix, especially in the case of the Word Bearer where purple and red are naturally complementing colors. I wanted to push that purple a little bit further. Also, I was inspired by one of the pieces of artwork in one of the Horus Heresy black books, so I decided to paint a small flame pattern at the end of the bolter. For the base, I wanted a lighter sandstone look, so I first started by layering on Walnut by scale 75, and then sponging on Thar brown and Mojave white, also by scale 75. Next, I applied a very diluted layer of Skeleton Horde contrast paint by Games Workshop. Then, after attached to the model, I went in with a little bit of various tan weathering powders and applied them dry to both the model and the base of the feet to make it look a little dusty or like a desert kind of. I did not actually seal these weathering powders in at all. I know there's a lot of debate over should you seal or not. And for my models, I like just putting the weathering powder straight on, leave it dry and dusty, and then just make sure I never touch that part of the model again. Finally, I paint the rim of the base black, and the model's done. So there you have it, the completed Wordbearer Tactical Marine, ready to spread the word of Logar and bring death to the Emperor. If you enjoyed this tutorial or found it useful, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps this channel out and helps me get more eyes on my content. Also, if you have your own favorite Wordbearer recipe, please leave it in the comments below. I'd love to see it. Thanks for watching and have a great day.